I've never been a fan of breaking up big tech. But maybe the real question isn't punishment. Maybe it's competition.
Hey everyone, it's Shimmy, and welcome to Thursday, Shimmy Says. Before we start, just a quick word. Tomorrow, Friday, I'm going to do another Shimmy Says. It's going to be sort of my wrap-up, year-end wrap-up look ahead. But for now, today's Shimmy Says is on something that I saw and I wrote an article about. It's over on TechStrong IT. I'll be honest with you guys. It's not very often that I change my mind on something. But I recently saw a debate over at Johns Hopkins University. It was on YouTube by an organization about breaking up big tech. And I know what you're thinking out there. For most of you, a debate, you're thinking like presidential election debates, where you may have some guy who's too old to put two words together and another guy that he's lying every time his lips are moving. And the fact of the matter is, we all go in with our preconceived notions and we're not changing our minds at all. But this debate in partnership with the SNF Agora Institutes, I think it's Stavros Nicolaides Institute over at Johns Hopkins, it really was the kind of debate that you would love. No cable TV screaming, no ratings, no applause. It was smart people on both sides arguing different aspects of a point. And the point was, should the U.S. government be breaking up big tech? Has big tech gotten so much power economically, socially, politically, especially, that it's become, there's more downside than upsides. In fact, some of these, they transcend governments and nations. They're worldwide numbers. Now, let me just say, I used to be against breaking up big tech, or against breaking up in general. For the most part, we're not in the robber baron stage. We don't have Standard Oil or, things that were broken up. For a lot of you, especially people in my generation, the only thing we've ever really seen get broken up was AT&T into the baby bells, as they called them. And that worked out pretty good, actually, when you think about it, because it gave birth to companies like Verizon. And the AT&T we know today actually reassembled a lot of those baby bells, Bell South and stuff like that, into what's today AT&T, along with some cell and cable stuff. But the problem is, I used to think of this was to break up these companies, you would smash them to smithereens. And quite frankly, I think they were too much of a strategic asset to the United States and to us, right? Because who's going to fill that vacuum? Chinese companies, other companies? Why would we break up some of the greatest successes in American corporate history? Why would we punish the teams at those companies who have done such an amazing job of building these hyperscalers, this Magnificent Seven, whatever you want to call it? I mean, these people, they innovated, they worked hard, they built these companies. To break them up just doesn't seem right. But you know what? Watching this debate, I recognized another aspect of this argument, and that is, breaking up these companies doesn't mean putting them out of business, right? We could still have a lot of viable companies coming out of this. And our digital economy would be better for it, right? So I'm not talking about just casually carving these companies up. The disruption and damage to our country, to our daily life would be just too big. Right? I think that's naive to think that's what we would do. But there is an interesting aspect to this, right? The breakup argument in this debate, I would characterize it as, hey, we don't have to burn it all down. It was much more nuanced than that. It was about creating competition, keeping competition, having incentives, about what would happen if we didn't have this Magnificent Seven just defending and putting up roadblocks and barriers to entry, right? And I realized something in listening to these people. I may not agree with the proposition, but I'm starting to agree with part of the diagnosis, if you will. Let me be clear. I'm not advocating wholesale breakups. I'm not about punishing Meta or Google or any of them. And this certainly isn't about politics. It's not about vibes. And I haven't gone out and become a Bernie bro and think, that they're too big to fail and all that. But I think using a scalpel, logical, targeted separations here can actually strengthen our markets, give us new growth companies, make them more competitive, and we all benefit. So for instance, I'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about. AWS. What happens if they weren't tied to Amazon retail? What happens if Amazon was spun out or AWS was spun out from Amazon and Amazon's Prime Video business and everything was spun out from Amazon retail? And we did something that, the Amazon retail business has stunted the growth of the retail market in this country and around the world, right? Could we make a provider at AWS that's also competing with Amazon? Yeah, I think so. Take Meta and Facebook, for example. If we unbundled Instagram and WhatsApp from Facebook, would we see more diversity of what people use, Threads and Instagram and so forth? Because they've melded into one big social platform that Meta controls this market with. Would it allow us, instead of having to mandate approaches to privacy, would having competitiveness between those products give us more privacy or more choice, right? I think that's a viable alternative. And each one of those businesses is a viable business that can go on and create its own path in the market. Google, look, the fact is we're already looking at Google in the EU. Google's search business was a monopoly. Now, with the advent of AI, yeah, we're getting some AI searches. But what has Google done? They built their AI into the search. YouTube is the second biggest search market in the world. Gemini, their AI is built into all of that. And then, because of that search, they dominate the online advertising space. And if that's not enough, through Android, they dominate a majority of the cellular market as well. Should one company do all of those things? If we were to break Google up into a search company, an AI company, the YouTube business as a separate business, Android as a separate business, they'd all be powerful, industry-leading separate businesses. But they'd make way for other companies to grow in between here, to have more opportunities, right? Not to stifle the competition. Would we be worse off for it? I don't know. Microsoft, look, this is a company that we've discussed before for antitrust issues when they had a lot more market of the desktop space. But today you have Microsoft that's one of the two dominant players in video game consoles. Office 365, yes, Google gives it a run for its money. But, if you take Office 365 out of the way, is Microsoft Azure still one of the top three clouds? Probably not. I think Oracle would be. But, there's an argument to be made around Microsoft too, and then GitHub and their AI business. Could these be independent businesses that are still viable and let us move along? What about the app stores, right? Apple controls access to your phone, and Google controls access to your phone, depending if you're on Android or iOS, through that app store. Should the app store be ruled by the same company that's making the OS, making the phones? I think we'd have a better reality if we had multiple app stores that were viable, and maybe spinning them off is the right way to go. And that's the point here. How do we make a healthy, competitive market that fosters innovation? I've always been a fan of that, even if I haven't been a fan of antitrust breakups. Competitive markets, letting the market work, is when we all succeed. You know, we've all heard we haven't seen a lot of innovation in, let's say, cell phones lately. Well, we don't have a lot of cell phone innovation because we only have 2 platforms that we work on, right? We need to change the incentives. We need to stop asking, how do we make this better? And start asking, how do we make sure no one catches up, right? That's what these companies are asking. History tells us it's important that when spaces open up, competition is fostered, unexpected things happen, new combinations, new way of looking, new companies, new ideas. Innovation comes from 360 degrees. It's hard to predict what will happen. You can't design it, you can't create it, but you know, the market is a funny thing, and when you let it run like that, it's great. There's also, I want to just pause here for a second, because there's also another aspect to it, and it's the geopolitical argument, right? It used to be that the government was the one talking about keeping big tech in check. But, you know, let's face it, in today's government, big tech owns the check, writes the check. And, you know, I realize that by trying to break some of these companies up, are we handing an advantage to China? Nature abhors a vacuum, will China fill the vacuum? Maybe, but I think if we're smart about it, not. And long term, I am sure we will be stronger for it by having more competition, more tech companies, more innovation, more choice. Instead, we're betting that Apple keeps its edge, that Google keeps its edge, that Meta, Amazon keep their edges, and that carries risk, especially in this AI-driven world where we find ourselves now, where computing and data are macroeconomic levers, and a failure there makes a failure that ripples across with catastrophic consequences for all of us. Today, look, it's hard to disrupt. It's hard to capture market when you're competing against these hyperscalers, right? We need a reality check here. Because let's be honest, I'm not saying we're going to do all of this tomorrow. To do it right, it has to be done thoughtfully. You have to use a scalpel, not a shotgun. The nuances have to be understood by competent people. You have to have bipartisan support behind these things. And today we don't have that. Those are, as a matter of fact, all those things I just mentioned to you are kind of in short supply. But ultimately, I do think it may be the right thing for all of us. It's a roadmap that we need to figure out. It's a conversation we need to have. This debate that I watched on Hopkins, and it's on YouTube, and you can get it on my article from TechStrong IT, it didn't have all the answers, but it gave me something more valuable than just the answers. It really forced me to rethink a position that I held, that I was really comfortable and positive of for too long, and realize there's more to this. There is another answer. There is some huge upside to breaking up big tech. This is Shimmy. I hope you've enjoyed this Shimmy Says. As I mentioned, I'll be on tomorrow with my year-end Shimmy Says, which if you think this was a big idea, I got bigger ideas there. But if you don't catch me tomorrow, and this is the only one you catch before the holidays, happy holidays, everyone. Happy New Year. I'll be doing Shimmy Says next year too, so stay tuned every Thursday. But this is Shimmy, I'm out.
Shimmy says, shimmy says, shimmy, shimmy, shimmy says, ask me almost anything.